Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell. This episode, I thought we could do something kind of cool. Both a roundtable style episode with Marie and I, and a full episode about the history and progression of my absolute favorite holiday, Halloween. Halloween is something of an interesting holiday. It's the one point in the calendar where we confront those things that scare us on purpose. Thinking about death, about what might confront us on the other side, and attempting to placate and help along those who have crossed over before us, as well as those things which were never supposed to be on our side of the veil in the first place. In the modern world, we don't think of Halloween in this way anymore, but this holiday really began from these older traditions of festivals to venerate the dead. So get out your jack-o'-lantern, put on your masks, and let's get spooky on this week's episode.
The moon in its red light, I know it's not right, it's just pretend. And you, as you sleep tight, I'll protect you from bed bug bites as trains they fly by. All that I wanted and all that I needed is sleeping right next to me, resting so peacefully. All that I ask, Kate, as you slowly drift off to sleep, won't you please dream of me?
Welcome to the Mad Scientist Podcast, episode 32, Halloween! No, dear listeners, that is not your ears deceiving you. We have played a different intro song for these Halloween episodes. That is, in fact, a song from one of my favorite punk bands of all time, Amazing Transparent Man. Amazing Transparent Man was an awesome band that pretty much wrote the soundtrack to my middle school, high school years. Their music is criminally under-listened to and under-known. They're an awesome band, and I highly suggest you go out and listen to them. I gotta thank, in particular, Rick, who gave me the permission to play this song on the air. You guys seriously wrote some of my favorite songs. Me and my wife still sing these in the car all the time. And listeners, if you enjoyed this music, Google it. It's Amazing Transparent Man. They're on iTunes. Buy the albums. Support these guys for the music they made. They are amazing. All right, now on to the full episode. Halloween really comes from a very long history of ceremonies and days in particular where we venerate our dead, help them find their way through the afterlife, and protect ourselves spiritually for the year ahead. And in many ways, it's a holiday that is common to all peoples, much like the underlying ideas that underpin these ceremonies. For Halloween to exist, there has to be a soul, something that comes after our time spent on Earth. And there also has to be some connection between these two worlds, a way for the people of Earth and the beings of this other place to come into contact. And this makes sense logically, at least if you assume that the soul exists in the first place, or perhaps even if you assume that the materialist conception of the universe, that we're all merely atoms built up by physical laws and a heaping of luck, isn't 100% accurate as well. I mean, if there is a solar consciousness, and it doesn't appear to be present here with us after the body itself is dead, then just where does this part of us go? And why couldn't we come back, even if only for a very short period of time? Halloween comes from the notion that whatever lies beyond this world is always touching it, but at most of the time is just out of our perception. There's something to the idea that the spirits both need help in finding their way onto the next life, and also that there's a particular time of the year, and perhaps even a single day, where the links between our world and the next are weakest. And on these days we give homage to the dead in honor to protect ourselves and venerate their memories, as we hope someday others will venerate and remember us. Holidays to venerate the dead are found throughout the world, and in researching for this episode, our beloved Igor found some wonderful stuff. There's the Chinese idea of the month of ghosts, the 7th month in their lunar calendar, which occurs around our August or September. It's thought that at the beginning of this month, the gates of hell are opened, allowing spirits to roam the earth, and at the end of the month, they're shut once again. This idea is actually pretty common out there, this idea that there's a month or a period of time where, again, either the gates of hell are opened or this veil, this this difference between our world and the world of magic, the world of death, the world where our souls exist, there has to be a time or a way to get between these two things. We talked about this a little bit in the episode on Hollow Earth when I was on Not Alone with Sam and, Sam from the Round Tables and the Lowdowns, I suppose. And in that episode, he talked about this idea of the underworld for the Aztecs. And we're actually going to talk about that a little bit as well. But in that episode, what we're pretty much talking about is that there are these caves, these caverns that existed underneath the normal world where we could actually access the afterlife. We could access where our soul goes after we die. And that's a similar idea to the Greek, the Greco-Roman idea, with stories of people going back down there to pull out their loved ones, the souls of their loved ones, rather. Or even the idea of the Hollow Earth as was proposed in the Americas and in Europe, really. So, anyways, going back to the Chinese idea of this month of ghosts, there's a particular holiday during these months that's called Yulan, or the Hungry Ghost Festival. A day where ghosts and evil spirits are appeased by the burning of fake money, clothing, food items, and all manner of things that they may need in the afterlife. And again, this idea that we can take things with us into the afterlife is an extremely common one, right? I mean, what do we all think of when we think about burying someone with all their stuff? We think of the ancient Egyptians and the pharaohs being buried with like their cats and all their organs and things, and them maybe coming back as mummies. This idea was a relatively common one because, we don't know what's on the other side of death. And so, who knows? Maybe you do need, I don't know, a nice pair of sneakers or something. Some other holidays that celebrate the veneration of the dead include Famidihana in Madagascar, which is literally a holiday where the bodies of the dead are disinterred, they're wrapped in fine linens and silks, brought back to the home of the living for dancing and celebration and like dinner and stuff, and then they're returned to their graves, but this time buried in the opposite direction from which they were originally disinterred. And it's thought that this ceremonial taking out, cleaning, fixing of the body, then reburial is sort of a way to fully complete the circle of life and death. There's also a really interesting holiday in the Philippines called, I'm going to try to say this, I'm probably going to kill it, but it's called Pangang Lulua. And it's a holiday where children go from house to house singing songs and asking for alms and things for the dead. And in current times, it's kind of been taken over by the Judeo-Christian religions. So now they ask for alms for masses to pray for those souls still in purgatory. But what's really interesting is that at nighttime during this festival, even traditionally, what people would do is, you'd have normal things out like in front of your house or even in your house. And when you wake up the next morning or when children wake up, some of these items are moved. And it's very similar to I don't know if your parents did this, but mine certainly did, where you'd leave out milk and cookies for Santa and they would take a bite out of it, or even out of the carrots for the reindeer and stuff, right? It's sort of a fun way to get kids thinking that something magical is happening. There's also a part of the northern Philippines called Luzon where stumps and tree trunks are actually lit up in graveyards in order to guide spirits who have lost their way and ward off evil spirits. And this idea of lighting candles and lanterns is a really important one for us as well. And we see it all over the place. One of my favorites is in Japan, the celebration of the dead, which is known as Obon. And here we get this really iconic scene of the paper lanterns floating down the river with candles inside of them, right? While veneration of the dead plays some part in our own Halloween traditions, another important aspect really comes from a long history of pagan holidays meant to celebrate and honor the gods of death. In polytheistic cultures, it was often the case that each god had a particular holy day, a period or festival where they were celebrated in particular, and their blessings, or at least a warding off of their curses, was asked for. And these holidays often had links to the cycles of nature. So, for instance, a holiday celebrating the god of fertility may have occurred around springtime, just as a holiday for the god of decay or death would occur at the end of the harvest season, the period just before winter, where the entirety of the natural world seems to die before being miraculously brought back with the first greens of spring. Death was also, of course, linked up with nighttime, the period where the world became in previous centuries significantly more dangerous and frightening. So the celebration of the gods of death on the night where nighttime itself is longest seems completely sensible to this mad scientist, at least. The Halloween traditions that we know now mostly come from three cultures in particular: the ancient Americans, most importantly the Aztecs, the ancient peoples of the United Kingdoms, especially the Celts, and the Greco-Roman peoples. And what we'll find is that the Roman Catholic Church, in an attempt to become the dominant religion of Europe by changing some hats and rules and leaving behind the awesome parties people had, took in many of these traditions and made them their own. In the process, they kind of vomited out what our modern day holidays are, such as Christmas, Easter, Halloween, etc. So the Aztecs had an extremely important role in building up Halloween traditions in America, and of course in South America, in particular Mexico. Dia de Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, is the Mexican version of Halloween, a celebration that I am 100% committed to celebrating in Mexico at some point in my life. This holiday has many roots that trace back to a traditional holy day of the Aztecs that celebrated the goddess of death. And I'm going to try to say this name as well. Mictecacihuatl. That is the goddess of death in the Aztec pantheon, unless I'm saying it completely wrong. Anyways, this holiday includes going to graveyards to clean up the grave sites, pray for those that had died, to go and look at, where these people had lived previously, to use skulls and skeletons as decorations, leave food out for them, all kinds of different things. Mictecacihuatl is actually pretty awesome too, despite her really impossible name to say. She rules over the dead, and in particular their bones, and is said to have been sacrificed herself as an infant. She is supposedly who swallows the stars during the day, and is shown a lot of imagery as having a wide open mouth and a very small amount of flesh, almost like a zombie goddess, which is just so metal. Anyways, some other festivals that occur during this day are the creation of altars to pray for the souls of loved ones at their grave sites, and usually at these altars, and even like school children will build these altars in school, although without the religious, connotations, I suppose. But you build this altar, you put an image of the person that you're praying for, you leave behind offerings like food or things that they liked in their previous life, and you also leave behind bundles of Aztec marigolds. This leaves behind a really, it's beautiful. It's a very nice thing to go and I think remember these people and mourn for them, but also celebrate them in their graveyards. And some of my favorite Halloween traditions come from this holiday, including the creation and eating of sugar skulls, called calaveras in Spanish, the use of pumpkins for all sorts of things, and the color orange again from those Aztec marigolds. In many ways, the Aztec celebrations are ignored when we discuss our own celebrations of Halloween, but they played an absolutely integral part of the fabric of our own holiday, and it's easily one of the top 10 coolest things we've ever gotten from the Aztecs. Another important culture where we get a lot of our Halloween traditions is from the Roman Empire, Greco-Roman, Hellenistic, just that whole mishmash of cultures that would eventually become the core of modern Europe. In particular, for the Roman calendar, we have a holiday known as Lemuria, or Lemuria. I don't think I said that very clearly. Lemuria, or Remuria, I guess, which is supposed to be a period of time or a celebration that Romulus instituted to appease the spirit of Remus, who he had killed. So one interesting part of this date was not only kind of, praying for the dead and also trying to keep them in your thoughts, but also in particular leaving behind food, burning special incenses, and kind of almost casting spells or incantations to remove evil spirits from your home, right? And these evil spirits, or restless dead, were known as lemures or larvae. And in particular, they were kept out of your home with the use of black beans. That's right, dear listeners. Beans, the magical fruit. I am a toddler. I am deeply sorry for that joke. Anyways, Ovid said that this festival was used in a way to get rid of these evil spirits. And so he said that, in particular, You would walk around barefoot and throw black beans over your shoulder at night. In particular, it was like the head of the household, so the father, I would assume, and they would say the following incantation: I send these, with these beans I redeem me and mine. Or in Latin, Haec ego mitto, his redemo mece mesake fabis. And you say that 9 times. And then the rest of the household, so you throw these beans over your shoulder, and then everyone else in your house starts banging pots and pans, basically, and starts screaming, "Ghosts of my fathers and ancestors, be gone!" It's a completely ridiculous holiday. But frankly, I don't know, man. Maybe the beans work? I don't know. I've never been attacked by a Roman spirit, I suppose. But then again, I've also never used beans for magic. Now, if you're like me, you had never heard of this holiday before. I certainly had never heard of it, and I feel like I know quite a bit about Halloween. I've read a lot of books on it and stuff. Although, again, like, I know a lot of stuff because I've read a lot of books. Like, come on, that doesn't mean anything. Anyways, this small section on this holiday I want to read out in its fullness because I think it's really good. This is from A Dictionary of Greek and Roman Antiquities by John Murray, London, 1875. Quote, Lemuralia or Lemuria, a festival for the souls of the departed, which was celebrated at Rome every year in the month of May. It was said to have been instituted by Romulus to appease the spirit of Remus, who he had slain, and that's from Ovid, and to have been originally called Remuria. It was celebrated at night and in silence, and during 3 alternate days, that is, on the 9th, 11th, and 13th of May. During this season, the temples of the gods were closed, and it was thought unlucky for women to marry at this time and during the whole month of May, and those who ventured to marry were believed to die soon after, whence the proverb, mense meo male nubunt. Those who celebrated the Lemuralia walked barefooted, washed their hands 3 times, and threw 9 times black beans behind their backs, believing by this ceremony to secure themselves against the Lemures. As regards the solemnities of each of the 3 days, we only know that on the 2nd there were games in the circus in honor of Mars, and that on the 3rd day the image of the 30 Argi, made of rushes, were thrown from the Pons Sublicius into the Tiber by the Vestal Virgins. On the same day there was a festival of the merchants, probably because of this day the Temple of Mercury had been dedicated in the year 495 BC. On this occasion the merchants offered up incense, and by means of a laurel branch sprinkled themselves and their goods with water from the well of Mercury at the Porta Capena, hoping thereby to make their business prosper. End quote. It's a really interesting holiday, and I'm actually really happy that we were able to find this. I'm pretty interested. I hope I'll be able to read a little bit more on this one as the time comes up. Anyways, like all things pagan, when the Roman Catholic Church came into power, this holiday was pretty much wiped off the map. Now, like that article said there, Lemuria was generally celebrated in May, and it was 3 days in May. But what we find is that Pope Boniface IV actually consecrated the Pantheon at Rome to the Blessed Virgin on that day, and actually created a feast day, the Feast of the Didactio Sanctae Mariae et Martyrs. And basically what that is it's a celebration dedicated to Saint Maria and all of the martyrs. Now, some people claim that this holiday made its way into Halloween traditions, and it's kind of easy to see how that could be the case, right? We have this veneration of the dead, we have this fear of the dead coming from house to house, and it being important that you yourself do something to appease them. And although the use of magic beans hasn't continued to the modern day, the links between Lemuria and modern day Halloween are, I think, pretty striking. Now, there is this idea out there that Halloween, and actually the name for Halloween, we get from a Christian holiday that's known as All Hallowtide, or All Sainttide. And what this actually is it's a group of 3 days. And these days are Halloween, or the Vigil of the Hallowmas, the Hallowmas itself, or All Hallows Day, and then the All Souls Day celebration. What these days are meant to be are a celebration of those who have come before you. So again, a veneration of the dead, and in particular, praying for the martyrs and saints that made up the Catholic pantheon. we can go into a whole discussion about how the use of saints and sainthood took up those polytheistic ideas in the past, right? I mean, there are saints for firefighters and saints for teachers and saints for driving and saints for walking and saints for fire and whatever, right? There's saints for everything. And in many ways, it's very, very similar to the polytheistic idea of there being gods for everything, right? And so, again, in the co-opting of these pagan holidays, the Roman Catholic Church had to find ways to fill in all these gaps, right? Well, if you have a celebration for the god of fertility, now we're going to celebrate Jesus. If you have a celebration for, the god of time or whatever, well, now we're going to celebrate Jesus. If you need a day where you're going to celebrate the dead, well, I guess the whole thing with Jesus is he comes back from the dead, so we're going to celebrate the martyrs and saints. And this isn't to take away anything from the Roman Catholic Church, right? I was raised Catholic. I have a lot of respect for that tradition and the mythology and everything. So, it's just an interesting historical fact. Anyways, the actual date for All Hallows Eve wasn't actually set in stone for the Catholic Church until around the 11th century, when the Abbot Odilo of the monks of Cluny decided that them and all of their monasteries were going to pray for the dead on, the end of October, basically. But it wasn't from taking that holiday of Lemuria that we get All Hallows Eve or Halloween, right? I mean, they're at the wrong times of the year. Lemuria was at the end of May or middle of May, and Halloween or All Hallows Eve is at the end of October. Instead, what it was a co-opting and takeover of a holiday that was extremely popular in the Celtic portions of the Roman Empire, or at this point, the Holy Roman Empire. And that is the holiday of Samhain, or Summer's End, where we get all of, the vast majority of our Halloween traditions. Samhain was the day where the veil between the magical world, or the world of fairies, and the human world became extremely thin. And as such, it was a day to protect yourself and your loved ones. Now, there was a myth or an idea that the evil spirits, those wishing harm on you, those wishing trickery and terror upon you and your family, would actually come to your door and demand offerings. And if you didn't give them offerings, then they would do terrible things to you in the upcoming year, right? An idea that is very similar and in fact morphed into our idea of trick-or-treating. What these spirits would do is kind of murky. It's not super duper clear what they would do. However, in general, it would be things like, petty acts of vandalism all the way up to and including, the murder of livestock, pestilence, the murder of you and your family, etc. Just, it's not a good idea to get on the bad side of a ghost or a fairy. Now, a big part of the Samhain festivals were the lighting of ginormous bonfires. And these bonfires were meant to be a place where you could pray for the dead, ask for them to have safe passage through the afterlife, and also, again, to ask for protection for you and your loved ones over the course of this, upcoming pretty terrible winter. Another really interesting part of this festivity was the creation of what was known as a court of misrule. Basically, locals would subvert in many ways the entire order of normal living, right? Halloween was a time for inversions. It wasn't just a period where the veil between light and dark became thin. It was a period where right and wrong and social norms and everything became subverted, right? And so one of the really funny things that they would do is they would get rid of their politicians, their town leaders for a day, and vote in a mayor of misrule. And this person would basically be paraded around screaming his head off, just getting drunk and weird and wacky. It sounds like a pretty good time, but I'm not sure if it would really, I don't know if that would fly in the modern day. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea to have a super drunk, crazy mayor, for even if it's just for a day. Another really interesting part of the Samhain tradition was the idea of mumming or masked revelry, or what was known as souling. You would basically go from house to house dressed up as these demons or dark spirits, and again, tell the people in the homes, if you don't give me a treat, I'm going to wish bad things on you. Or, you don't know, maybe I really am a demon. You better give me some kind of treat. And over time, this became a really popular thing in the Celtic lands, right? I mean, children were doing this. It was a more powerful or popular enough tradition that the Catholic Church took notice and said, man, we got to do something about this holiday, right? Another really important part of the idea from Samhain that we get today is the idea of the jack-o'-lantern. Now, the story here has become morphed over time to be one that is, again, more of a Catholic story, but the general idea is this. There was a man named Stingy Jack. Now, Stingy Jack was mean. He was a terrible neighbor and just an all-around bad guy. But Stingy Jack was tricky. And so one night he decided to make a pact with the devil. He asked the devil for something. Who knows what it was at this point. And the devil agreed to give it to him. But in the process, Stingy Jack tricked the devil by causing him to climb up a tree. And when the devil climbed up the tree, Stingy Jack placed a number of crucifixes at the bottom of the tree. Now, the devil couldn't get down, and he was stuck up there, and I guess, he couldn't get down to do all the devilry that he wanted to do that night. And so Stingy Jack said, listen, devil, I'll let you down, but you need to promise me that I'm never going to hell. And the devil, knowing that he could get one over on Jack, said, sure, I promise you'll never go to hell. And of course, the devil was tricking Jack, because Jack's an idiot. You could never beat the devil, dude. When Jack died, he went up to the pearly gates, and St. Peter said, you've just been a terrible person. I mean, look at you. You talk at the movies, you fart on the train, you're just a piece of crap, Jack. Get to hell. And so they send Jack to hell, and the devil's like, we ain't got room here, man. I made you a promise. And Jack's like, well, where am I supposed to go? I can't go to heaven. I'm not able to go to hell. What am I going to do? The devil said, well, I guess you can wander around. I don't know what to tell you, man. And Jack, looking behind him, noticed that the afterlife was, just blackness, total darkness. And Jack became afraid and said to the devil, please, you have to help me in some way. Take the deal back, do something for me. And the devil said, well, I'll tell you what, I got a deal for you. And he threw Jack some hellfire. And Jack, for reasons still not super clear to me, was carrying around a turnip. And so Jack put the hellfire inside of his turnip and would wander the earth forever with his jack-o'-lantern or turnip lantern in his hands forever. The children of the Celtic areas began to now carve out jack-o'-lanterns in order to ward off this evil spirit. And so originally these things were turnips. Ireland, Scotland, the UK did not have pumpkins until they came over here and we started sending pumpkins back. Or rather, I guess, until they got here and started bringing pumpkins back themselves. So if you look up what these original jack-o'-lanterns look like, they're pretty terrifying, actually. They're like miscarved wrong and they're just, they don't look super great. They're pretty spooky. But the idea of Stingy Jack and a ghost holding a lantern and moving about is still actually an extremely popular one, right? There's the idea of the Will-o'-the-Wisp, a spirit that's holding a lantern in the bogs and forests at nighttime, and which you might see floating about in a graveyard or swamp or, deep, dark woods someplace. Scientifically, these things are probably either methane gas explosions, little explosions or flares really, someone with a flashlight, or, I don't know, ball lightning. There's all kinds of really interesting potential physical explanations for these things. But the mythological or historical basis for them it's one of my favorite legends by far. The story of Stingy Jack, I think, is so cool and so fascinating. Now, over time, as the world became more technologically advanced, I guess, or the idea of spirits and ghosts started to kind of fall away, the idea of Halloween as a celebration to ward off evil spirits kind of lost some of its power. However, the idea of it being a time for anarchy or tricks or misrule became more and more important. If you read modern day accounts of what Halloweens were like back in the Victorian era, or even all the way up until the 1940s, it's pretty intense. And you're going to hear in the roundtable with Marie and I that when I was a kid, I also practiced some pretty intense Halloween celebrations. New York City on Halloween is like a giant shaving cream and egg covered wasteland. It was a lot of fun when I was a kid. I can't imagine I would like it very much now as an adult who owns a car, but it can be a lot of fun if you do it safely and correctly, kids. And we actually see these depictions of Halloween as an anarchist's favorite holiday throughout history. This is one of my favorite sections from a really, really interesting journal article that's called Halloween in Urban North America, Liminality and Hyperreality by Nicholas Rogers. So here is this story here. Hallowtide was also marked by forms of masking, treating, and revelry. On All Saints' Day, mummers went a-souling, that is, begging for alms in return for prayers for the dead in purgatory. The practice was officially banned at the Reformation, but some version of the custom persisted in Catholic and Celtic areas of Britain into the 19th century. In Scotland, children went from door to door carrying turnip lanterns and asking for festive tributes or soul cakes. Souling was also vigorously observed in Ireland, where on All Hallows' Eve, or Odic Samhain, Charles Vallancey reported, quote, "The peasants assemble with sticks and clubs, the emblems of laceration, going from house to house, collecting money, bread cake, butter, cheese, eggs, etc. and etc. for the feast, repeating verses in honor of the solemnity, demanding preparations for the festival in the name of St. Columkill, desiring them to lay aside the fatted calf, and to bring forth the black sheep. The good women are employed in making the griddle cake and candles. These last are sent from house to house in the vicinity, and are lighted up on the next day, before which they pray, or are supposed to pray, for the departed souls of the donor. Every house abounds in the best viands they can afford. Apples and nuts are devoured in abundance. The nutshells are burnt, and from the ashes many things are foretold." Mumming or masked revelry was also very much a part of Halloween. In Tudor England, the holiday opened the official reign of misrule, when urban leaders were temporarily usurped from power by mock mayors and sheriffs in a ritualized upside-down world replete with subtle disguisings, masks, and mummeries. In country districts, the wild heads of the parish chose a grand captain of mischief to play the fool during the festival of misrule, so Philip Stubbs observed, dancing and singing with such a confused noise that no man could hear his own voice, and demanding tributes from the neighborhood to maintain their heathenish devilry. Those who declined, he noted, were mocked and flouted shamefully, yea, and many times carried upon the cowl staff, and dived head and ears in water, and otherwise most horribly abused. Halloween was thus closely associated with the festival and shaming rituals, rough music, skimmingtons, carivery, that were an integral part of early modern popular culture. End quote. I don't even know if I want to know what skimmingtons mean, but like at the edge of all of this kind of funny stuff, there's always this edge of danger, right? There's another really awesome account of the previous era's Halloween. So this is from an article called Halloween History by Leslie Bannatyne. And so this one here I really like. It says, quote, "Halloween celebrations first depended entirely on the religious and folk fabric of each region. The Caledonian Society in Canada, founded in the mid-19th century, kept the Scottishness of Halloween up front, and people gathered to read Scots poet Robert Burns' poem Halloween each October. Children in Scottish-influenced Kingston, Ontario went out guising in their neighborhoods. The first North American media mention of a trick-or-treat-like custom comes from here in 1911. And Ruth Edna Kelly reports in her book Halloween, 1919, that it was the custom in her area, very Irish Lynn, Massachusetts, to go souling, among other festivities. In the Ozarks, Halloween could mean a barn dance. In New York City, parades and firecrackers. In Philadelphia's history, tavern-hosted costume parties. If there was a commonality, it was this. Halloween, being the night the spirits were out, was a time for anarchy. To those who rail at seeing toilet paper in the trees, consider these Halloween pranks. Kids in 1879 collected tea kettles, boots, and stones, and piled them in a neighbor's vestibule, knocked on the door, and bolted. They coated chapel seats with molasses, exploded pipe bombs, built huge pyramids of stones on streetcar tracks, and smeared the walls of new houses with black paint. The employees of a butcher shop in Albany, New York, stole corpses from a nearby medical school and hung them in front of a rival shop on Halloween in 1894. 200 kids with bags full of flour attacked all the well-dressed folks on streetcars in Washington, D.C. in 1894. They strung ropes across sidewalks and tripped people ambling along, tied the doorknobs of opposing houses together, broke trees, mowed down shrubs, upset swill barrels, poured crude oil on sidewalks, shattered windows, attempted to jack up churches, greased trolley rails, removed telephone poles, and once filled the streets of Catalina Island with boats. End quote. I mean, that's like super villain levels of just what? Filled the island with boats? I don't even know how you would do that. It's truly amazing. I mean, looking back at the way Halloween has been celebrated throughout the ages, it's always been a festival for subversion, for anarchy, for the weirdest and most, like, it's a time for us to look back at the year, think about those we've lost, but also a time to look at our customs and societies and think about how they can be subverted and how almost satirical or silly some of these things are, right? This idea of misrule, I absolutely love that. All right. So in many places, actually, Halloween was, if not banned outright, kind of not supported locally, right? I mean, it was really a time for mischief and anarchy. And in fact, many places have an official name for this. It's called Mischief Night, and it's usually the night before or the night of Halloween. I know in particular Detroit is well known for its Mischief Night. So where did Halloween kind of get its facelift? Where did Halloween go from being a almost legitimately dangerous holiday to one that is more, you know, candy and spooky, but kind of cute ghosts and stuff? It wasn't really accepted for trick-or-treating as a child to become commonplace in America until the 1950s, where UNICEF started the Trick or Treat for UNICEF campaign. And this really made Halloween a celebration for children as opposed to a celebration where, I mean, in many places it's still kind of this thing, but a celebration for people to get drunk and do weird things on the street. And since then, it's been a pretty steady stream of Halloween becoming more and more accepted by people, more and more practiced across the United States, and in fact, more and more practiced across the world. Another really interesting thing that we saw in our research for this episode was the fact that in many African countries, Halloween is starting to be celebrated, which is a huge problem for the very religious in Africa, right? So, for instance, there are parts of Africa that still have legitimate witch hunts, and yet there are children celebrating Halloween, right? There's some really interesting op-ed pieces in journals and websites and things that basically say, like, how can we be a Catholic country or a Christian country and still celebrate Halloween? And in some ways, America still kind of struggles with that as well, right? I mean, there are parts of the evangelical community that don't think Halloween is a worthwhile holiday or shouldn't be celebrated outside of a religious context, you know? So, what does Halloween really mean to us as modern day Americans? One thing that I really like about Halloween, and it's something that I've had a lot of friends from other countries say to me, is that Halloween, it's not a religious holiday anymore, right? It's a time for us to be spooky and scare ourselves and go to haunted houses and haunted hayrides and stuff and, you know, drink Kool-Aid that is made to be viscous like blood and, you know, just do spooky, cool, fun things with your friends. Get dressed up and go out and have a party. And it's this aspect of Halloween as a subversion of normal norms, right? We get to dress up as we want. We get to go out and do things we wouldn't normally do. The streets are lit up at nighttime. Everyone's out at nighttime. That in itself is a very interesting subversion of what we normally do, right? And it's this aspect of Halloween as being a holiday where anyone can take part because it is all inclusive. There is no religious barriers to Halloween. There's no mythology you have to subscribe to or no religious incantations you need to say or religious stories you need to believe or anything like that. Halloween is in that way a very American tradition, and it comes from a long line of traditions in many different cultures. Well, dear listeners, that is it for tonight's Mad Scientist podcast. I need to thank everyone that has ever given the show a listen so far. This is our official 1-year anniversary. I started the show actually back in August of last year, but I always said then, and I will continue to say, that we really started off with our first Halloween episode. Before that, I was pretty much testing things out. And this year has been, more amazing than I can even describe to you. There are so many of you listening to this show. I've made so many phenomenal friends. We have so many great people who support us. And there are a lot of big opportunities coming to us being able to spread science, being able to talk about pseudoscience, being able to investigate pseudoscience and other things like that are coming from this show and from all of you listeners that I can't even describe how thankful I am for all of you. So not to get too mushy, but listeners, thank you so much for paying attention to this show, for giving us a chance, and for sticking with us. If you enjoy the show, please continue to listen. And if you haven't gotten a sticker yet, please shoot me a message. I would love to send you one. We will be back in a couple of days with both a roundtable episode where Marie and I discuss our memories of Halloween and what we like about the holiday, as well as a episode with Dave Flora from Blurry Photos, one of my favorite podcasts and a part of the Dark Myths Collective along with us, where we are going to talk about our biggest fears. I think it should be a lot of fun. Once again, dear listeners, thank you so much for listening. I am your host, Chris Cogswell of the Mad Scientist Podcast. My logo was designed by the amazing Carrie Shaheen.